I think now it's all theoretical, hypothetical at this point because they haven't put it on the field yet. But just on paper, and I know we've said this before, and it doesn't always come to fruition, so take it for a grain of salt. But on paper, I would say for the most part, I believe that they have upgraded this defense.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome to another 3 Mile Pod. I am your host, Cole Manbeck, joined as always by Derek Young, publisher and editor at KSO on the On3 platform. No John Kurtz today, but we are here to bring you up to speed, as always, on the latest in the transfer portal and the recruiting efforts of Kansas State as they look to round out the roster heading into spring football here in a couple of months. As always, get stocked up with your Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon from our fine friends over at Holiday Distillery. If you have a chance, go take the campus tour over there as well. It's a fantastic time and a wonderful opportunity. If not, go to your nearest liquor store, pick up some Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon or 360 vodka if that is your drink of choice. Fine folks who support us on 3 Mile and tremendous K-Staters over at Holiday Distillery. So go get stocked up with their products. DY, some more activity in the transfer portal since we last did a show about 5 days ago, and things are constantly moving. Now, K-State is safely in the clear when it comes to their roster for now, as the portal window for K-State has closed. K-State's players had 5 days after the bowl game to still enter the portal. No surprises, no new entrances into the portal after the bowl game, so K-State is in the clear and did a terrific job in retaining most of the talent on their roster. So everything is good there. Now we look toward rounding out the rest of this roster. And one of the guys that we talked about on the last show was a guy that we really coveted and liked to round out the cornerback room for Kansas State. We're going to make this actually our top storyline of the show, brought to you by our friends over at Elenco, premier home improvement company owned and operated by tremendous K-Staters that is based out of Kansas City. And DY Amarian Fortenberry, talented 6 foot, 5'11" corner from South Alabama, a true freshman this last year, committed to Kansas State late last week. This is one we were heavily monitoring. Again, he's young, 3 years of eligibility remaining, started 8 games as a true freshman at South Alabama, performed pretty darn well, a tremendous tackler. Our guy Parker Eves wrote this on our Discord on patreon.com/3mile on a transfer portal breakdown. But he's though he's only 175 pounds, he isn't afraid to tackle and will come up and run support. He does better as a press man corner than in zone coverage. He has good speed to stay with quicker, shiftier receivers and plays bigger than his 5'11" size and stays with taller receivers. He can play as an outside corner or in the slot. He showed an ability to make plays, especially in the LSU game when he had 2 pass breakups and 1 led to an interception for a teammate. Fortenberry, a good addition to the talented young cornerback room who should have a good chance to start in 2025. Really like this addition, DY. And again, now you have you've stocked up a lot of young, promising corners in that cornerback room. What do you make of Fortenberry and what he means to K-State's defense?
It was a huge need, I thought. I thought they needed to bring in a cornerback that they could count on to potentially be a starter, and nothing against Jaden Rowe from Oklahoma, who they also added first, but his history suggested that was more of a wild card. So Fortenberry, I think, is a little bit more reliable, a little bit more trustworthy. Huge upside, still 3 years of eligibility, as you alluded to. One of my favorite additions in the portal, just because of how good I think he can be, how good I think he could still be, and how good he already is. Just the fact that it really addressed a need. And then you look in your cornerback room for next year, and you started to dive into this as well. Experience is pretty light, so that'll be a concern moving forward. They don't really have as many adults in the room outside of perhaps Justice James. Of course, Jaden Rowe too, older, just hasn't played a ton. So that'll be something that maybe arises as an issue at some point. Chris Kleiman always likes that one adult in the room, the one really experienced player that can show everyone else the ropes. They won't have that, but they'll have about 3 or 4 guys that are quite a bit younger that I think all are starter worthy or could be starter worthy at some point. in the next 365 days. So I think that's no small thing. And obviously, I'm pointing out Zayshawn Rich, who I would probably pencil in as a starter right now with Marion Fortenberry. But then obviously they're excited about Donovan McIntosh and what he can be. He played in the bowl game and was pretty solid in his effort. Justice James is coming back. They brought in Jaden Rowe, and that doesn't even count Kenigel Thomas, who surprisingly didn't enter the transfer portal, which throughout the season I thought he was probably a lock to do so. But because you kind of added that depth at corner and have multiple guys that you have the ability to trust, maybe you move Kenigel Thomas to a safety and add the depth there, which probably isn't as strong. You probably know who your starters are going to be, but some of that second line, you're probably trying to figure out which guys you can still count on. So Kenigel Thomas at safety is probably still on the table as well. I think he played 3 or 4 snaps in the bowl game, and I believe they were at safety.
Yeah, I think he's got some versatility to him. And DY, one of the things I like about the cornerback room as we look at it is Fortenberry at 5'11", 6 feet, give or take, is one of the smallest cornerbacks in that room. I mean, they have the potential to be pretty physical on the outside when you think about Jaden Rowe at 6'2", 6'3", Donovan McIntosh at 6'2", 6'3", Zayshawn Rich at 6'1", and we saw how physical he was in the bowl game and throughout the season when he got some snaps. So a lot of length on the perimeter, some ability to tackle as well. I mean, one of the things that'll stand out when you watch Fortenberry's highlights is his ability to tackle. I mean, he loves to come up and hit. He played safety in high school, so that makes some sense. Was even recruited by Ole Miss coming out of high school, ended up going to South Alabama. So really like this addition for the K-State defense and like the cornerback room now. Feel pretty good about where they're at when it comes to that, as well as safety. I think the defensive side of the ball, I think the defensive staff has done a really nice job in the portal so far. Feel pretty good about that. Most of the needs remaining really are on the offensive side of the football, which we'll hit on this show. Before we do that, I'm sure our folks over at Elenco are celebrating and looking forward to seeing Marion Fortenberry play for Kansas State this year. As a reminder, as always, Elenco is a local company based out of Kansas City. They're owned by tremendous K-Staters, and in an industry where many home improvement companies have been bought out by national corporations, Elenco has remained locally owned since they started in 1986. If you're thinking about getting new windows on your home or doing a bathroom remodel, Elenco specializes in premium window replacements as well as the Kohler Luxstone shower system. If you need new siding on your home, they've got you covered there as well. And perhaps Elenco could take care of my sunshine problem blasting me right now. As you see, probably if you're watching on YouTube and have seen before, I need some new curtains or drapes in my office, apparently, as the sun is blasting through on this bright and early Tuesday morning and really reflecting off the snow. So I apologize by that. I might have to contact Elenco to see if they can hook me up with some curtains here. I'm sure they could. You don't need to live in the Kansas City area if you need Elenco. They cover much of western Missouri, northeast Kansas, surrounding KC Metro. So if you live in Manhattan, Emporia, Topeka, Wichita, small towns around the northeast Kansas side of the state or in western Missouri, Elenco will come your way. Go to elencohome.com. That's ALENCO home.com. Check out all the services they offer. Or you can give Sam, who's a great K-Stater, a call on his cell phone at 913-961-2165. He'll get you taken care of and answer any questions you have. Go support Elenco, a terrific local family business owned and operated by K-Staters. All right, DY, one of the things that we didn't hit on the last show, actually, and I think most people know this by now, Uso Seumalo is returning for the Kansas State defense at defensive tackle. The JUCO ruling, thanks to Diego Pavia of Vanderbilt, the quarterback who challenged the ruling about junior college players, ended up getting an extra year of eligibility. That opened up the door with questions about what that meant for all the other junior college players in college football. And as it turns out, those players with eligibility expiring this year were granted an extra year of eligibility. As soon as that came out, we heard Uso was going to come back. He made it official on social media, I believe, last week. So K-State is set at defensive tackle now. You know, they brought in, 3 different official visitors at one point at D tackle to give them depth behind Damian Ilalio. But once they knew Uso was coming back, they pulled back the reins, and now they've got Ilalio, Uso back, who's going to be going into his 4th year at K-State now, DY? 3rd or 4th year. I mean, hopefully, he continues to grow and get better, a guy who was raw coming out of high school. But a nice bonus to get Uso back and not have to spend a premium amount of money in NIL at defensive tackle for depth.
Yeah, and you also get a guy that you know exactly what you're getting, and he knows exactly how things are done, and what he's supposed to do, how it's supposed to look. So it also creates a vacuum of opportunity here because you know you don't need to chase a defensive tackle. And as you said, it's a premium position, hard to secure in the portal. So this is kind of like just a safer route to establish someone, to establish a need. Whereas those 2 or 3 other recruitments that you were involved in, that you were trying to win out for a defensive tackle for, I think Horace Lockett, a Georgia Tech transfer, was an example. Eventually signed with UCF. You don't have to count on winning one of those. So it probably limits the ceiling of that room a little bit. I'm not going to lie, because you're not really enhancing it to any degree. But you also raise the floor, in my opinion, and it is a passable grade right now. And to your point, I really love. I thought the defense has done a terrific job in the offseason so far. You didn't really need to add too much on the edge or anything on the edge because you brought everyone back besides Brendan Mott and some of the younger guys that you are bringing back. You're anticipating huge steps of development and progression, or regarding if it's Toby Osunsami, Chidi Obiaiz, or Ryan Davis or Jordan Allen. So you got to feel good about the upside of your defensive front, even though you are losing the Big 12 Defensive Lineman of the Year. At linebacker, you have Gabe Powers, who probably fills the need at the will linebacker that's going to be vacated by Austin Moore. You probably do need a little bit more depth. Is that Ralph Ortiz, the Division II transfer out of West Florida? I would say we're still counting that as a when he commits and not necessarily if he commits. It wouldn't have shocked me if he's already signed. I'm sure that that's a possibility at this point. So that's probably something we'll hear about in the near future, I would think. And it sounds like he has a little bit of positional versatility too. A guy that can maybe play not just the same linebacker spot that you would guess he would be slotted for at his size. I think he's just a touch over 200 pounds. He'll probably be one of the fastest, if not the fastest linebacker in the Kansas State linebacker room. But it sounds like they think he's still young enough or still, in the midst of his development enough that they can tack on 5 or 10 more pounds there without him really losing that athleticism. So, and we've already talked about the back end where they've added Jaden Rowe and Marion Fort Mary to solidify the cornerback position. And we haven't even spoken about safety, where you've already added Barcavius Moss, which was a huge recruiting win considering all the schools that were chasing him. You defeat Nebraska at the last hour. Gunnar Maldonado, who might be their favorite transfer commit across the board at this point. So hats off to the defense. I think now it's all theoretical, hypothetical at this point because they haven't put it on the field yet. But just on paper, and I know we've said this before, that doesn't always come to fruition, so take it for a grain of salt. But on paper, I would say for the most part, I believe that they have upgraded this defense. Now, the factor that'll tip the scales one way or another is if you get that expected development from the defensive ends. Because if you don't, then Brendan Mott becomes a pretty large hole that you have to fill. So those defensive ends do have to come along.
Yeah, and obviously Jacob Parrish at corner was a big loss, but you feel like you're probably deeper at cornerback, I would say, DY.
Yeah, I would say that, and it's probably unfair to expect Fortenberry or Rich to be that right away, but you probably think you have 2 corners or maybe even 3, that are better than the top 2 or 3 this past season. As a whole, you're probably not going to upgrade over Jacob Parrish. He might go day 2 in the NFL draft, but you can upgrade as a whole.
Yep. I would agree with that. Austin Morgan at linebacker, but you hope Gabe Powers can fill that void and maybe even a little higher ceiling. Credit to everything Austin Moore did during his 6 years at Kansas State and was huge for this football program. Don't want to undersell that, but bringing in a former top-tier recruit at linebacker in Gabe Powers. K-State beat out Wisconsin and Minnesota and North Carolina for, in the portal again, who was a top 10 linebacker in his recruiting class 2-3 years ago. So hopefully he's able to transition well to the K-State defense. They'll be counting on him. Ralph Ortiz, you mentioned, transfer from West Florida Division II school. He was the GSC Freshman of the Year in 2023 at that league, and was a former safety who transitioned down to linebacker. To your point, he's 6'2", 205 pounds. Thing that we've talked about before with him. He pops with speed when you watch him, and he could probably get to 215, 220 and still maintain a pretty good level of speed and be one of the faster linebackers on K-State's defense. So the defense has done a wonderful job in the portal. Feel pretty good about where they're at. They may still look at one more guy, best player available type scenario. We'll see what happens there. More to come on that front. We won't mention any names, but maybe one more guy that Kansas State could be looking at on the defensive side of the ball. Other than that, the offense is where the remaining needs are, which we will talk about when we come back from break. But before we toss to a break, got to tell you, as always, about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Get on over to homefieldapparel.com, where you're going to find nearly 60 K-State items on their website, between hats, jackets, pullover jackets, hoodies, all retro, sleek designs with the retro K-State logos. Super comfortable, soft. I got a Home Field hat on right now, and I got my Home Field campus pullover retro jacket on as well. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. Very comfortable. Got the Power Cat on this sleeve here as well. Love the color, love the look, and again, super warm, as you've heard me talk about before. So not your traditional windbreaker or pullover. It is a very warm, and it's really cold out today, and my office gets pretty cold in the mornings, and this thing is keeping me very warm. So get on over to homefieldapparel.com. 3 Mall 24 for 15% off. DY doesn't appear to be rocking Home Field. He probably didn't pack enough for his 5-6 day excursion to last.
If Home Field wants to send me like a turbo package, I could use it. Running out of clean clothes. I was supposed to be home on Sunday. It's Tuesday. I got to get out of Stillwater soon too, because they're about to get blasted by stormy air pretty shortly as well. So I've just been stuck and stranded.
DY, why don't you just go from Stillwater back down to Dallas and take in the Cotton Bowl and watch your Buckeyes?
There was a thought of doing that. I'm not going to lie, but then I saw the weather for the Cotton Bowl. I was like, hey.
You mean you didn't want to be snowed in then in Dallas for like 3 days because they don't have the equipment to probably get out of that for a while down there?
Yeah, 3 days. 3 days probably an underestimation too.
Yeah, man, that's tough. But DY's been on the road since Saturday morning flight to Fort Worth. The bad part about it for you and everybody else that I know that went is you pretty much knew you weren't getting back once you took off. So we all saw the forecast coming and you guys got stuck there. So as you can see, DY doing this from a Stillwater hotel room for us this morning, and covering the Cats tonight in Stillwater. So hopefully we'll be recapping a win on a show here later this week. Get on over to homefieldapparel.com, 3 Mall 24, score 15% off your entire order.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
All right, DY, the one commitment we do have to talk about on the offensive side of the football since we last recorded actually fills the running back room for Kansas State. Obviously, we knew Joe Jackson and Dylan Edwards were coming back, but we did know that they wanted a veteran running back, more of a bigger bruising type running back to take a little bit of the burden and workload off of Jackson and Edwards, be a different style of running back. And I thought they found a pretty nice fit, actually, because you got to find somebody that's willing to be in that role. Right. That's part number one. But you also want somebody that has some talent and capacity to be effective when he is on the field. And they land Gabe Urban Jr., who's a 6'1", 220-pound running back with 1 year of eligibility remaining, transfer from Nebraska. People are going to look at his stat lines, DY, and see, he only had 14 carries for 41 yards for Nebraska this last year. And they're going to be like, I don't know about this. Look, Gabe Urban was the first. You talked to some Nebraska folks who spoke highly of Gabe Urban when he came in. He was the first running back in Nebraska school history to start as a true freshman at that position. What do you make of this addition? And obviously, I should also say that it was injuries that affected that. His stats would be far better if he'd stayed healthy. But What do you make of the Gabe Ervin addition to the running back room for Kansas State?
Yeah, low risk, high reward. Probably doesn't impact your ceiling. I think you probably agree with that. But it impacts your floor, and that's really what depth is, impacting your floor. We could be this bad. No, now it's this bad. No, now it's this bad. Those are important things. So you're really preventing your seasons from bottoming out by taking guys like this. And although you want to look at the guys that here's our ceiling, we could be this good, we could be this good, we could be this good. The floor and addressing that is just as important. So Ervin does that. Now, someone made the joke that he has the the agility of a semi or something like that, which is probably pretty fair. We're not going to see a lot of wiggle or left and right with Gabe Ervin, but that's also kind of what they were wanting. Like you said, a different style, a guy that can really move the pile, and he'll certainly be able to do that. Limited production in his career because of some injuries here and there, but he was going to be the starter in 2021, and then he won the job again in 2023. So a guy that does have some talent, does have some ability, and caught the eye of the Nebraska coaches on more than one occasion. Now, why did Kansas State feel like they had to do this? You alluded to it a little bit in terms of wanting something to help maybe the durability of guys like Joe Jackson and Dylan Edwards. Dylan Edwards missed a game this past year. Joe Jackson's been banged up a few times throughout his career. Those are Gabe Ervin. You needed a quality third running back that was ready to play, and he is certainly that. And you also got to think maybe they were looking and being pretty responsible as well. I'm talking about the Kansas State coaches and knowing that Joe Jackson's not going to be able to participate in the spring because he's having an off-season surgery. So you need another running back to kind of take those carries as well in the spring so you're not getting Dylan Edwards beat to hell.
Well, and I think we understand that they probably, like we saw in the bowl game, they probably want to use Dylan Edwards in a few different ways, right? So he's not going to be a guy that lines up at running back every down, but they're going to split him out wide and use him in the slot, use him on the outside and in the passing game as well. And having another guy as a depth piece that can be that guy that gets you a 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, helps alleviate some of those hits on a guy like Dylan and also enables you to do some different things offensively. And one thing I will say, DY, when I watched Ervin's highlights is, well, yeah, he doesn't have much wiggle necessarily, pretty explosive, pretty good burst for a guy his size that can get upfield in a hurry. And, 2023 season, so 2021, he started, we mentioned, first true freshman running back in Nebraska school history to start his first game of his college football career, or the season opener of that year. Suffered a seasoning knee injury 4 games into the season. Unfortunately, wasn't able to go the rest of the year after that. 2023 becomes the starting running back again, just a couple of years later, set to be the starter at Nebraska. He had 38 carries for 196 yards in the first 3 games of the 2023 season, 5.2 yards per carry. And it wasn't like these were against just FCS-type opponents. I mean, the first game, Minnesota, he had 7 carries for 55 yards. Then Colorado, 17 for 74 yards, and then 14 for 67 against Northern Illinois. And so was off to a nice start. Unfortunately, had another injury. Now, people are probably going to say, well, what if he gets hurt again? That's a risk you kind of have to take, and a guy that's willing to take on that role for Kansas State's offense here to be that depth piece at running back. But a talented kid, originally from Georgia, and obviously a nice fit for Kansas State with that bigger physicality type running back. So running back is now done. We obviously know quarterback is good. Interior of the offensive line, probably good. And tight end is good. Kansas State is looking for another receiver. We should just not bury the lead there. It sounds like Malik Benson, who we talked about and made our link our top storyline of the week last week on the show. It was between K-State and Oregon. It sounds like that is trending toward Oregon being the pick. He visited K-State and then soon after went to Eugene for a visit. And it seems like Malik Benson is once again going to go for the big name program, and we'll see if it works out for him. But the Lansing, Kansas native looks to be trending toward being a Duck, formerly Alabama and formerly Florida State as well. DY, anything to add on the Malik Benson recruitment or wide receiver maybe in general?
Yeah, well, Malik Benson, I mean, they give it a whirl. I mean, that kid is really hoping looking for bright lights, and hopefully for his sake, it works out for him this time. For K-State wide receiver recruiting, look, I'll be honest, I'm not guaranteed. I'm not convinced that they add another wide receiver. I think they're trying and they want one and a quality one. I don't know that they'll add one that they don't consider quality, though. I think they'll live with the guys they have, and I think you're running out of choices a little bit unless something else happens in the portal, because they also lost Jalen Lloyd, the Nebraska transfer, that I think they were involved with. I'm not sure to what extent, and that never sounded serious to me, but obviously he picks Oklahoma State. So here's my thing is, like, because of some of the stuff that happened last year offensively, and just that I think Kansas State in general, I think some of I think a lot of the receivers, by nature, don't view this as essentially a sexy enough destination right now. So going out and getting a proven wide receiver with huge production numbers or even huge potential, I think is a challenge for the Kansas State coaches. I think that's something that's really hard to do because some of the reputation here is kind of baked in. And by nature, I think receivers are a little bit more, they look for something different. Look at what Malik Benson has done 3 times now. I mean, I think that's a lot of wide receivers think that way. So I think that makes it challenging. So again, I think it's going to be hard for Kansas State to go out and get a proven receiver. I think they got, for the most part, go get guys or use the guys they already have in the room and make them those kind of proven contributors. I think that's where they're at in this process. I think this position is really challenging. Now, the struggle at offensive line is a little bit more confusing to me because that seems like it would be more conducive to Kansas State. I say struggle. They haven't found what they need in offensive tackle yet. Maybe there's a couple options still out there that could make some sense. I don't know how much contact or if there's a whole lot of contact, but I do like George Fitzpatrick, the guy that from Ohio State that just entered the transfer portal. They tried for one offensive high state offensive tackle already, and Zim Mikulski, and he picked Indiana, stayed close to home. He's from Indianapolis. George Fitzpatrick's from Denver. The only reason why I bring up his name is Kansas State recruits Denver quite a bit, and they definitely recruited Fitzpatrick out of high school.
Yeah, Fitzpatrick, a former 4-star offensive tackle, number 13 offensive tackle in the 2022 recruiting class in the On3 industry consensus rankings, 6'6", offensive tackle, and you mentioned it, from Cherry Creek High School, a school K-State has recruited from in the past, and the Denver market. So we'll see if K-State gets involved with a guy like Fitzpatrick, and second time's the charm here with an offensive tackle from Ohio State in the portal. Going back to Malik Benson, it's just ironic that, I mean, he chose playing for DJU and what ended up being the worst passing attack out of all Power 4 schools in college football. Now he's going to Oregon, which I'm not taking a shot at Oregon because they were the number 1 team in the country all season and went 13-0, but their quarterback situation is in question as well. Dante Moore may be the guy that they have to turn to, and we'll see if that works out for the Ducks. But I think there's some question marks at quarterback for Oregon as well. Look, the concern I have BY at receiver is, like, I like Jaron Bradley and hopefully K-State's ability to unlock him. I like Jaron Tibbs, 6'3", as a Trey Spivey type replacement, 300 yards at Purdue last year. But, you know, if you look at numbers squarely, I mean, those two combined for 400 yards receiving last year. I mean, we're talking about, you know, needing to upgrade the skill level talent at receiver, give Avery more weapons, and they're bringing in 2 guys that combined for 400 yards last year. I mean, if they don't add another guy, and it needs to be a quality guy, not just a guy to add. Like,
that's the thing, though. But if you add another guy, it's going to be someone like Bradley and Tibbs. Like, I'm just saying, that's
it's frustrating. I
don't think Kansas State has the ability to go out and get that. I don't think they're getting that kind of look from a guy like that.
Yeah, I mean, they need to do better then. I mean, you got to sell it.
They had to turn the guys they have into that. That's what has to happen. To be fair, which they have with Jace Brown. They have turned him into that guy. And Jace Brown is the best wide receiver they've had since Tyler Lockett.
Yeah. And look, Jace Brown returning is obviously a huge asset.
They'll have to turn someone else. They'll have to develop someone else the way they developed Jace Brown.
It seemed pretty clear by the guys that they were chasing when they got connected with Lloyd, the Nebraska transfer as well, who averaged 26 yards a catch in his first 2 years. And then obviously Benson as well, DY. It seemed they wanted a guy that could stretch the field, more of that vertical threat. I don't know, to your point, if that's out there now at this point. Ismail Cisse wasn't really a guy that like gave that look, but he committed to Arkansas anyways. K-State was mentioned with him in the recruiting process. Stanford wide receiver, he committed to Arkansas on Monday.
Again, I realize it's a wild card, but when he was performing at a high level a couple of years ago in Lubbock, Jaron Bradley was a guy that did stretch the defense.
Yeah, he's not necessarily like the type that's going to burn you, but he can run well enough and he can out jump guys. And obviously,
that's the thing. You don't have to be a burner to be a guy that stretches the field, though. If you have ball skills and have size,
yeah. Let's hope that K-State and Matt Wells, who has strong familiarity with Jaron Bradley, can unlock that. Offensive tackle, to your point, I'm perplexed by this. K-State has playing time to sell. I mean, Connor Riley is a good offensive line coach, and they have missed on pretty much everybody they went after outside of Amos Talalele, the USC offensive guard transfer, who we really like. 3 years of eligibility left and a guy with a bright future. I think he's got a very good possibility that he will start on the interior for K-State this year. But offensive tackle, we've heard from the get-go, they would like to get ideally 2 offensive tackles, and we're sitting here and they still haven't landed one. And now we learned that Mason Bowers, a transfer from Kennesaw State, they just offered and a visit was set up quickly. He is visiting on January 8th. That is Wednesday of this week, 6'4", 295 pounds. See why the concern I have with this. First of all, it seems K-State's serious about Mason Bowers, given he's visiting within 2 days of being offered. He didn't see any playing time in 2023 at Coastal Carolina. Only played in 4 games in 2022, which was mostly on special teams. Then he goes to Kennesaw State as his top option this last offseason, where he starts for Kennesaw State. But Kennesaw State went 2-10, finished last in Conference USA, fired their coach midway through the year. He allowed 12 pressures, 2 sacks this season, has below average PFF grades, and a 51 pass blocking grade, which is not good. I'm concerned about where they're at offensive tackle. What do you make of this?
Yeah, like I kind of already said my spiel there, where you would think they would have more luck in the recruiting there, just because by nature it's a school that does well in the trenches. I'll wait a little bit. Connor Riley I think is a good offensive line coach. Maybe this past season a little rocky at times, notwithstanding, but I would say that in the idea of Bowers, I do think, because of what I know how their operation works, I'm talking about PFF, I do think people are making a big, and I can't stress that enough, mistake in you really using their grades. There were times where Cooper Beebe had grades under 60 for pass blocking, and that was just absolutely asinine. So, and they can't watch every single college football game. There's almost 60 college football games a day, and they have grades up like 15 minutes afterwards. It's asinine. It scientifically, logically doesn't make sense. So I think grades-wise, if you want to watch the tape, you want to flip on a tape and don't like what you see in the guy, I agree with that. But no, I will not take those PFF grades as gospel. I never will. There's guys for Kansas State last year. Toby Osunsanmi had some terrible grades at times. And yeah, so I think we need to be careful on PFF. I only use PFF for snap counts. I'll be honest. Everything else, maybe some stats here and there. Everything else is I won't really trust. So, and with the Bowers thing, it's probably a guy that's high upside that they probably view as a project anyway. I'm going to guess. But
he can't be a project. He
can't be a project. But that's how I would see it. But he only has 2 years of eligibility left. So, or he was a project, and it's not. They now feel like he's rising to the top based on. He was a project when he was at Coastal Carolina in those 2 years. Based on Kennesaw State, they saw him popping. So, what I will say is I'm going to trust a Kansas State offensive line coach that has a hell of a lot more experience doing this than a PFF intern that doesn't.
Yeah,
PFF pass blocking, run blocking grades, get the hell out of here.
I get the spiel on PFF, but DYU's got one Power 4 offer. I mean, let's just look at what other coaches aren't.
Felix Anabike Izama didn't even have one.
Yeah, okay, but let's look at the timing of this offer. I mean, we're sitting here. They clearly are offering this as a backup plan.
I'm not saying this guy is sensational. I am saying that I think we're doing this an injustice by using some of the data that we are using.
Well, I think I would always urge people to just use PFF as one of many tools.
Yeah. But I won't for a pass block, run block grade. The guys that are doing that know football less than you, Cole.
Well, I will say I really like the PFF college football show that those guys do.
But those guys aren't the ones doing the grades.
I know. I like those two, and I'm blanking on their name. I watch it every week during the season. I'll mispronounce one of their names. I won't say it, but credit to those two that do it. I get it. Like, we heard the Cooper Beebe grade stuff last year, and some of them were ridiculous. So I understand that. I would not use it as the primary source here. Honestly, with Bowers, what I'm using is the fact that he couldn't get on the field in 4 years at Coastal Carolina and then had to transfer to Kennesaw State, which was one of the worst programs in America. That's where I'm coming from with him, not so much PFF. Now, maybe Mason Bowers is a diamond in the rough and the light bulb came on 5 years in and, K-State sees something there. He's probably, if he's a take, he's probably the second guy, right? He can't be your top guy you take on the offensive line.
He's a questionable, for me, I have questions about the take in general, just like you. It's not because of some grades, but again, it is bizarre on the surface. So I've got to think that they think something unlocked last year.
Brandon Snee is the other offensive tackle. Wagner, we talked about. He's scheduled to visit K-State at the same time as Bowers. So we'll see. Maybe that could be used to apply a little bit of pressure on Snee. Snee visited Colorado, then visiting Illinois currently, and will be at K-State. Now, Illinois, I believe, returns their starting offensive line. So we'll see. Maybe K-State will get Brandon Snee, though I would say also with him, he's a guy that transitioned from tight end a couple of years ago playing at Wagner. It will be a challenging transition to Big 12 football for a guy like that, though he has the tools and potential to be good.
I will say there's a plenty of offensive tackles in the NFL right now that are beginning their career as a tight end.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. And the only thing with Snee is he's got 2 years of eligibility left, and I would love to have Brandon Snee. I think the potential and potentially unlock it would be great.
And I'll even use a local example. The guy out of Central Michigan was drafted, number 1 or number 2 overall, Eric Fisher.
Yeah.
By the Chiefs. He was a tight end at Central Michigan.
Yeah. The only reason I say this with Snee is they need a guy that can come in and play right away. And so will he be able to do that? Will he transition quickly enough? We'll see when it comes to him. I know people will ask me why Gus Hawkins redshirted this year at tackle, John Pastore. Look, John Pastore's got a bit of injury history. I would say this. The ceiling is incredibly high for Pastore and Gus Hawkins. But you don't want to be relying on those two to be both your starting offensive tackles. And Langang can play. Andrew Langang obviously showed us to play some tackle.
I would love an offensive tackle that could come in and play right away and start. Don't get me wrong. But there is a scenario where you can kind of go in there and squint and be like, they can put something together. You start one of Pastore and Hawkins at tackle and Langang at the other. Langang was exceptional at tackle in a bowl game. So now that lessens what you could do on the interior, but Sam Hack comes back at center. You just brought in Amos Talalele. Now he hasn't played a lot of football, but he has a lot of potential. A guy that I like is Drake Beckwith, kind of. So he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. And he played really well, even if it was garbage time this year. And then Taylor Portier could come back. So even if you were to strike out, it's definitely not best case scenario, but I would not call it a disaster.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to monitor it and report back on any new commitments that Kansas State gets or any new buzz in the transfer portal. But I think that'll be it, DY, for this show. Anything to add that we missed on?
Nope.
No. DY will be covering the game if you're listening to this on Tuesday. He'll be covering the Cats in Stillwater along with Mason, I believe, if Mason can get down there. Mason making the trip still?
They'll probably be depending on the weather, I see. So.
Yeah. So hopefully the Cats get the win in Stillwater by the time you're listening to this. But for Nick Springer behind the scenes producing the show and Derek Young for joining us, thanks all for listening to another episode of 3 Mall.